Alright, we're back for the third and I guess the last one for the moment. Uh, Now, in this one, I'm going to start and stop using Actionscript. Now, starting is a natural thing for the Flash movie. By default, it's going to autoplay, and so if you open one up, it just begins and it runs to the end. But what I'm going to do is interrupt that process and then create a way to jump to a point in the timeline where we want to start the process and where we want to see what's going on. So the first thing I already have squared away is I already have a button. So if you look in my library over here, here's my start button. So I'm not going to go into the steps on that because that's a couple videos back. Now I'm going to create a very simple animation out here on the stage. And as we go through it, I just want to make a couple little points. So here I am on frame 1. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and I guess I'll turn off the stroke and I'll fill it with a more interesting color than black. Alright, so here's a rectangle. Now, at frame 10, I'm going to simply hit F6 to add a keyframe. And at frame 30, I'm going to add a blank keyframe because what I'm doing is just a shape tween here. And you might remember the blank keyframe just kind of makes that process a tiny bit simpler by removing the earlier image so that you can replace it with what you want to replace it with. So I could do this a couple of ways, but the way I like to is right click, insert blank keyframe, and that'll just drop that in there. Now the stage is clear and that's exactly what we want from it right now. I'll go back to my shape tools, I'll grab the oval, I'll change the color just to make that a tiny bit more interesting, and I'll draw a big circle in more or less the same place where I drew my rectangle a moment ago. Now, the shape tween is not really the point of this, and I've got a different video on that already. But what I'm going to do is just add a shape tween right here, so I'm clicking in the timeline between those two frames and choosing shape tween. So that's what we have right now. Now this movie, if I hit enter, the playhead just runs down the timeline and it shows the movie to you in exactly the way you'd expect it to. Now this is where we change it up a little bit. I want to pause the movie at frame 1 and give people the option to start it when they choose. Now remember, this is part of your final assignment, your final project assignment. Your movie, your cartoon, should begin in a paused position, and when I click a button, I'll get to see it. That's the idea. So the first step is click frame 1. Take a look at properties. Always make sure that you've got the frame selected rather than some object before you add the snippet of Actionscript. And I'm heading back to snippets right here. And it isn't actions I want right now. I still have that open from a little earlier. It's timeline navigation. So I'm going to give a click on the little expand collapse arrow next to that there so I can show you. And the very first one is stop at this frame. So that's pretty easy to find. Now you could practically have typed this yourself. If I go to show code, you can see this is all it really is. It's just that's Actionscript for stop. And I'm going to click insert. Down it goes. And now if I hit Control Enter to preview this thing, let me just collapse the snippets first. If I hit Control Enter, it just sits there. Now, that's what I want, remember? So that non-happening, non-event is exactly the outcome we were looking for from that. And if you look on the timeline, you can see a tiny little script A on frame 1 there, and that's just a little visual indication that there's Actionscript on that frame. Now, next part is starting it, now that it's been stopped. So, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to label this layer button, so it's easy to see what it is. I'll label what was layer 1 down here as animation. It's just a kind of a good thing for you when you're working on a big project to have all your layers labeled so you can easily tell them apart. Now I'm clicking on frame 1 of the button layer, and I'm going to go into my library and grab the button Start. Okay, so there it is, sitting right there. That's an instance of it, of course. And excuse me, what I'm going to do is with that button instance selected, I'm going to go give it an instance name. I'm going to call this one Susan because I strongly advocate giving them dopey names when you're doing this so that you'll find it easy to recognize them in a list. Sometimes the names are so technical that you just kind of gloss over and don't quite make sense of which one is which. So there I am. I'm going back and clicking first frame on the timeline, checking my properties. I have a frame selected. And now, from snippets, under timeline navigation, the one I want is click to go to frame and play. So the idea here is that I'll be giving this button the power to hop over the stopping point where I stopped it a couple of minutes ago and go straight to the place I want it to go to in the timeline. So I'm going to click here, show code, and it's again a little description of it. Now, you don't always have the good fortune for it to remember the name of your instance, but remember, if you gave it a silly name, you probably remember the silly name. I called this one Susan. Okay, so that's my event listener for this thing, right? And then there's one more thing to add down below here. I'm just going to pick which frame I want it to go to. Now, frame 5, as they have selected here, would be fine, but my movie really begins at frame 10, so that's where I'm going to change it. And I'll click Insert. Down it goes. And yes, that's my cat in the background. And I'm going to hit Control Enter and take a look at it. So it's still paused. I click my Start button, and the animation begins. That's it. I'll be back eventually with other videos for things you should remember, but that'll do for the moment. Yes, Momo, that's the end. I mean it.